tutorial starts with a song, but it's only a few seconds long. Let's get started with animation. Hello folks, we talk about bullet time today. Bullet time is not a new expression coming from 360-degree photographs. No, it comes from the sort of late 1990s. In 1999, Matrix was released, the first Matrix film, and it had several scenes which looked so amazing at that time because they froze people in time. We see a camera motion around a character who is almost dead on the ground or who tries to escape a bullet. That's probably why it's called bullet time. But the effect is being achieved by a set of cameras, expensive cameras at that time, arranged around our character. And they shoot in a certain sequence, tuck, 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 much faster, obviously, while the character falls down, for example. They can be triggered so they shoot all at the same time. Then you have an exact freeze of the whole motion. And that's basically what we're going to replicate this in Maya today. You can do this in all animation packages, obviously, and it's not a very complex effect. And as you probably know, if you're familiar with my channel, I always start with a new scene, at least I try to, and I try to be as short and brief as possible and get to the point, and not too fast, because we have lots of beginners in this course as well as advanced people. So enjoy this video about bullet time. For bullet time, we need to freeze an animation over time. We freeze it for a while and then the animation continues. This is typically done by something like this. You set a keyframe here by pressing the key S. You're at frame number 1. You go to frame 40 and move it over here and up here and press the key S again. And now you press the key S again because between frames 40 and 60 you want to have the sphere stay at the same place. And then you go to the end of the animation and set another keyframe. So the animation goes like this. Here's the freeze and then it continues. And while the freeze happens, usually much longer than just 2 seconds, you can move the camera around that object. This is the difficulty in the real world, and it's pretty easy here. Let us try a slightly more delicate animation so I can show you how to do this with manipulation of keyframes, and I give you a hint about the time warp in Maya. Okay, for example, we choose polygon modeling a cone. I move it over here and a little bit up, and when I go to FX, because we want to use gravity, etc., I can choose my gravity session from the N world, but I don't want to do this because the simpler way for this direct approach is under fields and solvers, and I need only 2 commands. One is gravity, so I attach gravity to this object. The gravity node sits in the center of the scene, which doesn't matter. The cone falls down, obviously. Now select the cone again, and here in the attribute editor you find rigid body. And the rigid body is basically controlling the dynamic behavior of this cone. You have in the rigid body attributes you have 2 sections. One is this basic section which controls friction, dynamic friction, bounciness when it bounces on the floor, for example. And you have an impulse which is basically the impulse which is carried through the whole animation. But what we can do is we create a spin, for example a spin in X and in Z, just more or less random numbers, and now this the cone rotates. This is a good start, and what we'll do now is we go down to the initial settings, and in the initial settings we have an initial velocity. That is basically how we shoot this cone into space. This is the y-axis, which points up. Let us give this the value 10. So the initial velocity up here is 10, and since z is this direction and we want to shoot our cone into this direction, we give it a slightly bigger velocity. So this is what it does. That's not too bad at all. Now we don't have keyframes in order to stop our animation right here. There are no keyframes here. Whatever I select, the gravity of course is not keyed, and this is also not keyed. But we can bake the animation. That means we have a simulation like this, and we select this object, and then we go to animation. That's important because if you're not there, you don't find the key menu, and under the key options you find bake the simulation. Use the option box if you want to change anything. I just bake this, and now I have lots of keyframes all over the place. And now I can delete the rigid body, edit, delete by type, rigid bodies. So this is all gone, and I have my animation just as it was before, but now it's baked into keyframes. There are no ways to change the initial velocity or spin, for example. This is all done now. Let us, and we can scrub back and forth now, which we couldn't in the simulation because the simulation always needs to be cached or start at the very beginning. So let us, for example, go to frame 36, and this is the frame where we want to have our bullet time, where we want to spend time to circle around that object or look closer to at this object. Under key you find scene time warp. Play with this. I think it needs an extra tutorial because the time warp is slightly odd. And another thing you could consider doing is using under animation editors the time editor, which is basically a video editing module in Maya where you can do these things as well. But I want to do it in the graph editor. So it's under Windows, Animation Editors, and Graph Editor. And here I see these complex curves for the translation, rotation, and scaling. The scaling doesn't do anything here, of our cone. And we're at frame 36. What I'll do now is I select all the keyframes, all the little yellow dots from frame 37 to the end. You see the tangents, which is not really crucial here. Now press the key W because I want to translate something, and with the Shift key I now move the whole arrangement to the right. And I move it to the right as long as I want to have my time warp, my bullet time in the scene. For example, from frame 36 to frame 94 or something like that. Let me minimize this. What does the animation look like? Now you see this empty space here, which means there is something happening there. Slight rotation, and then it continues. This is almost perfect. And one of the nice things here is that it doesn't stop abruptly. It has between these two keyframes and between these two, it has smooth tangents. That means it is not totally abrupt. It would be abrupt if you would just cut the animation there. Now the final thing, and I leave this to you, is to circle around that cone during that period of time. And I did this with, well, a very simple character animation where the chap walks and jumps, and during the jump I rotate the camera around him. I do this, just a hint, I do this in the top window. I go to Curves and Surfaces and I create an arc. And the arc function goes like this. I set 3 points. One is here. One, for example, is here, and the last one is here. And then you can attach a camera to that arc and move the arc around and scale it and rotate it, etc. and move it further away, whatever. How do I attach a camera? Well, create a camera. Here's the camera. Now, in addition to the camera, select the path. This is this curve. Now you need to be under animation, and here is the constraint menu, and here I find the motion paths. Use the option box. You can change it, your animation, to the time slider, or give it a specific start and end. For example, from 40 to 110. And I apply it. Now the camera jumps to that arc, but I want to keep the rest to you. This, at least, is a starting point for the bullet time animation with a camera motion. Bye-bye.